Today is November 4th, 2023. By some of you, by now, I should say, some of you have probably been wondering what's the full story behind what makes me such a unique case. Just a few hours ago, I just got done interviewing for a guest spot, and the host asked the very same thing when we got into my story, at least the more exotic part, the one involving the ET wife and children. Why me? And there's been several people much more experienced than I am when it comes to this type of topic that have wondered the exact same thing. What is it about Dakota that makes his case so damn weird? Honestly, it's a question I've asked just about every single day. Every single day that I've become more and more aware of what's happening. Some of you may be familiar with this, but others, you don't know the full saga. Truth is, I don't know the full saga. It's something that still unfolds just about every time I go to talk about this type of stuff. I mean, hell, the guest spot I just filmed, we had some sort of audio interference. Surprise, surprise. So let's start from the beginning. What is it that makes my case so unique? What makes this all entirely possible? There's a number of different factors you have to take into consideration. Some that I honestly have struggled for many years to both comprehend and be able to share. Because it seems like, truth is, the pattern that remained was that anytime I went to share this, somehow it went to go bite me right in the ass. By the very same people I entrusted. Learning to break that cycle of distrust has been difficult. Because the ones who seem like they genuinely want to hear out my story, most of them get too intimidated. Especially when they start to realize that certain factors of my past have actually tried to kill people before. So this episode may be a little rough for some viewers. Heed this warning before you start to complain. Because we're going to go into some topics that might be triggering to some people. In order to truly understand what makes someone's case their own, you have to understand both light and dark. As much as we all want to focus on the happy, the positive, the loving, the light, it's only ignoring the shadow parts of ourselves. And we're dualistic beings. Human existence is dualistic. Aspects of the shadow feeds what we bring in for the light, and vice versa. And I know there's some of you who feel like I shouldn't have to explain this, but let's just face it. There's just some people who are eager to put down others who dare speak out. So let's get started. I'll make a very careful note of whoever tries to use this against me. I don't want to have to do it, but unfortunately, some people just don't give you a choice. First off, we may have to acknowledge the complexity of the situation. We have to acknowledge that certain aspects of what I'm going to talk about, the moral and ethical boundaries that would have to be crossed in order to understand it by scientific principle, is astounding, may lead to genocide. And what do I mean by that? Well, let's start with something easy. Psychic abilities. What are some common triggers? You have genetics, you have head injury, trauma, you have emotional trauma, abuse, you have cases of abuse. Then you have situations where you can enhance and take practices psychic ability. These are all well-known examples. Genetics, obviously. These kinds of cases are passed down from parent to child. Exactly why that is, who knows? My theory states that genetics, DNA, has some sort of safety measures in place. Anything that goes to attack the parents, the child may likely end up having to face the same thing. So what would be the smart thing to do? Have some sort of imprint on what to do or how to counter certain actions. Embed it in the very being of the child, so that in the event the parents don't last long enough, the child still has a fighting chance. Now this goes to point 4. How one can take on exercises and meditations in order to seemingly enhance psychic ability. Tell me, how is it that a child of artists, be it music, painting, drawing, whatever the medium may be, the child of artists is seemingly born with enhanced artistic ability? How certain personality traits can come up in a child, even if that child, for some reason, has never, ever met their parents, their biological parents, for whatever reason they may be. Again, that is more proof that something about the DNA registers what happens in an organism's, a person's daily life. So that when that person goes to have a child, that child has some sort of information ready to go. They may not realize it until the situation comes up. But now, that also leads us to the situations of trauma, abuse. When I personally have studied the numerous psychics that I've come across, the ones that passed all the initial tests all seem to have some very common factors in their backgrounds. Some very fucked up shit happened to them that seem to awaken these abilities. Now, there's also been other cases where individuals who had autistic tendencies seem to possess these abilities as well. Again, I must emphasize that these cases are not necessarily a one-size-fits-all explanation. You have to personally examine each and every case, up close and personal. Almost a little too personal at times. There's also been noted that several of these individuals seem to have some sort of epilepsy. In some cases, it's the full-on epileptic seizures that most of us would think of when we hear the word, where they lose control of their body, they start spasming, shaking, and maybe in some cases their spasms gets to be so violent that you have to restrain them, otherwise they're practically pulverizing themselves and they have no control. There's also a second form of seizures that simply looks like someone is zoning out. And they can zone out for hours on end if something does not cut off what's triggering the seizures. It's not as harmful. They retain just about all the information that's happening around them. Some cases, these forms of seizures are mistaken as episodes of ADHD. But in the same light, like I said, they're fully retaining all the information. They're processing everything. They're there. It just looks like the lights are off. Now again, this bounces back to genetics. It could be a simple genetic factor of why they have these seizures, or it could be an instance of trauma in some form. Domestic violence victims have altered brain patterns. Everything that we take in on a daily basis affects our neurological patterns. It's unavoidable. You sitting down to watch these videos, it's affecting how your brain chemistry works. It affects how your neurons are connecting. It's undisputed that this happens. So in these rare instances, it seems that psychic abilities, the trauma that one undergoes, seems to be a survival response. This is why you might hear some remarks about how you hear all these people online saying they're empaths. Well, are they really empaths, or do they just have a hyper focus on other people's emotional responses as a safety measure against abusive patterns in the past? Are they watching for signs that someone is about to flip out on them? Are they watching out for signs that someone they've wanted to try to build up a trust for is about to turn against them like everyone else did? These are questions we have to ask. As for why people seem to have alien abductions, there's also a few other theories that come up to that. Something about these traumas can release almost like an energy blast at times that other beings could pick up on. This is why you have instances of poltergeist, potentially even demonic possession, visitations, spiritual visitations. These energies have an imprint on the environment. And anybody who's dealt with both spirits and ETs can validate that ETs can have a lot of the very similar manifestations of spirits, but several times stronger. But just like with psychic abilities, a pattern emerges that's been noticed in abduction circles. For some reason, people with O negative blood seem to be more likely to end up being abducted. Why is that? Well, simply put, O negative blood is universal. There's less chance of rejection. If it's for a hybridization program, whatever offspring gets produced is less likely to be rejected in whatever host, in the host mother's system. And guess what? In my case, I'm O negative. As for what triggers a starseed response, that gets to be where it's the most interesting. According to author and contactee Elena Denon, someone who is a starseed, a genuine starseed, their bloodlines have to be altered in order for a foreign soul to take within a physical body. DNA from the soul's planet of origin has to be integrated into the body. And chances are, the vessels, for lack of a better word, that these souls take up have been modified over generations in order to mimic natural selection to the best of the ability. Now, of course, some of you may be thinking, Dakota, what the hell are you talking about? That makes no sense. Stop and think for 5 seconds. What is it that we have noted within mainstream science that confuses many who have seen it take place, but it's happened so many times that they can't necessarily deny the fact that it occurs? Some of you may be familiar with stories of organ transplant victims, organ transplant patients, organ transplant recipients starting to take on personality traits, hobbies, talents of the person who originally had the organ that was transplanted into their body. It seems to me that these starseed programs, the envoy programs, whatever terms you want to utilize for them, had some sort of basis in this phenomenon. It makes sense when you really think about it. The DNA of the organ donor is still in that organ. So if somehow, like I mentioned before, DNA is recording everything that happens to a living person so that it can transfer certain traits onto offspring, then it's only feasible that the major organs also carry these DNA traits as well. And if they're transplanted into another person, then a literal piece of that person, literal piece of mind, body, and soul, figuratively speaking, gets integrated into this person. But it also comes up with something. There's also something else that I don't really see get spoken of a lot, but the more you really stop and think about it, the more it makes sense. When it comes to alien abduction situations, you always hear of hybridization programs. Whether it's a situation like me where I have hybrid human children. They're still technically human. Their mother is technically a type of human being. But or let's go for a more exotic example. The human gray hybridization process, where allegedly the Greys were abducting people because they needed DNA samples, because their cloning procedures deteriorated their original DNA strands, and they needed our DNA in order to help their species survive. If that was actually the case, they would technically only need to take two people, a male and a female. But I digress. Say we have an instance where a woman is abducted and implanted with one of these hybrid children. When a woman is pregnant, it is well known that if the mother gets injured, the fetus will actually send some of its own DNA, some of its own stem cells, to the damaged area to help the mom survive. Because obviously, if mom dies, the baby dies. And the baby doesn't want to die. Let's ignore the abortion arguments of that statement, please. Let's just brush that off to the side. That's a completely different topic. But the fetus, it wants to be able to survive. It wants to go to full term. So there's a literal DNA exchange. Part of that fetus's DNA goes into the mother. It's also been found that those DNA strands stay in the mother for quite some time. And if the mother has more children down the line, that DNA gets put into the siblings. This happens with normal, everyday human babies. For obvious reasons, if the firstborn child of the mother is a boy, it's a little bit more prevalent. It's little bit more exposed for obvious reasons because of the Y chromosome, but it's still there regardless. DNA from the oldest sibling gets transferred into the younger siblings. Now, I believe, off the top of my head, the human body essentially regenerates all of its cells within 7 years. In about 7 years, every 7 years. So, like every 7 years, technically your body is completely regenerated with all new cells. So there may be exceptions to this, but for the sake of the discussion, the DNA from the baby goes back into the mother and vice versa. With the Greys, this could very well be a form of integration. It would allow further generations to be compatible with that certain species. Bouncing back to starseeds. Say we have a Pleiadian starseed. They're the ones that are supposed to be the most like us. Which they are, just more often than not a lot better looking. Anyway, if you have a child in the mother, in a human, Terran human mother, and the father was a Pleiadian, that the DNA is going to do the same thing. That DNA is going to integrate itself into the mother and to future children. It literally affects the evolutionary line if something doesn't happen to those kids, and they're able to produce children, and so on and so forth. It makes it to where a new species is born. A literal new species is born. If you take out Anunnaki influence, the stories of Enki, Ea, whatever name you want to refer to them by, manipulating human DNA early on in our ancestry. Mainstream science speculates that at least 5 different hominid 5 different hominid species interbred in order to create modern humans. So we're already high. We already are walking examples of this. You take into consideration the 24 different species of ET, the cedar races, as they're noted, samples from them coming into it. Again, that creates a new species. In theory, this would allow for Terran humans to be genetically diverse, to where we're genetically compatible with several different species. And to an extent, that is the case. It's also part of the reason why they say Ea integrated his own blood, and O negative blood came from Anunnaki. Something about the RH factor allegedly acts as a counteragent for psychic abilities. So, O negative type blood people might be more spiritually inclined, and as well as also possess latent psychic abilities. Bring this all together. You have the potential for a truly magnificent species that is capable of almost godlike potential. Going back to what I said, that how a lot of people assume that because all these different races came together to create human beings, humans are genetically compatible with all these several different species. Like I said, to an extent that is the case. If that would be more the case if every single human had the exact same mixture of DNA. That's not the case. There's actually an animal here on Earth that proves this point. The cheetah. It is speculated that several thousand years ago, the cheetah was facing extinction, and its only method of survival to ensure that its species lived on was incest. And it's happened so much that not only do cheetahs have a number of genetic defects from the inbreeding, their bodies are so intercompatible that if a veterinarian needed to perform blood transfusions or anything like that, or skin grafts, there's no worry of rejection because it's all within a comfortable enough compatibility range. When it comes to humans, if someone is a Pleiadian starseed, again, I'm just using that as an example because they're the most like us. They're supposed to be our galactic cousins. That person is going to have a higher percentage of Pleiadian DNA. So therefore, interbreeding with certain other species becomes a lot more difficult. Not necessarily impossible with proper medical treatments. I mentioned in the previous episode that in one of my recall sessions, I remember treating this woman who was carrying a half-reptilian child, and essentially after some DNA scans, the father, I can't remember the exact species he was, but the father, the way his body looked, his head kind of reminded me of an iguana a little bit. And I do know that there's supposed to be a species out there that does resemble kind of like humanoid iguana looking things. Peaceful ones. They're benevolent. They wouldn't be very likely to kill us if you were to run into one. Let's just put it like that. There was an issue with this woman. There was enough of a genetic mismatch that her body was starting to reject the baby. However, we were able to create a stabilization agent to inject into this woman to where she was able to carry the baby without any further issues. But then again, that comes with a truly detailed and deep understanding of anatomy and physiology of several different species, as well as likely artificial intelligence integration to help calculate those potentials. As for my case, what is it that makes Dakota so weird? Well, to keep things short, it seems to be all of the above. Growing up, I had a number of medical issues, some that required extensive hospitalization, surgery. So I knew my blood type early on, O negative. Now, at the time, I originally thought, that's one of those things that someone should know in the event that they need to give a blood transfusion, so they can tell the doctors what blood type they are, so they can, get the help they need. Or, in my case, it would be a situation where if someone was injured and they needed a blood transfusion, I could give them some of my blood and there wouldn't be any issues. On a side note, would any of my dispositions transfer to the individual that received my blood? It is very possible. I've only had one instance where that was experimented. No, it wasn't. It's not like, no, I wasn't like trying to be some sort of mad scientist. A friend of mine, she hurt herself real bad, and I was a match. And she dealt with some pretty interesting visions for a while afterwards that she still has, is my understanding. But she's learned how to better understand what's happening and just deal with it. When it comes to trauma, I'm not going to lie. I've taken blows to the head, and there's been situations of abuse. Some of you may know this, but my father is actually currently sitting behind bars for some of the things he did. He sexually assaulted one of my sisters, and while I don't have physical memory of him attacking me, some therapists that I've addressed that concern with have pointed out that some of my personality quirks may be indicators that he did do something to me. But it wasn't just him. It was also his wife, my stepmom, who stabbed me in the back of the neck when I was 3 years old, and I fought back. I won't go into full details of those stories just for timekeeping's sake. But nevertheless, I would be very scared of someone who didn't walk away from those types of things without some sort of mental trauma. But in my case, or at least according to stories from family members, even before that took place, strange events were going on with me pretty much for as long as I was able to walk and talk. I was a psychic kid. And as it turns out, I had a genetic disposition from my father's side. to psychic abilities. I have a grandmother, my father's mother, who allegedly speaks to angels. However, and in the event I am misquoting this fact, I do apologize. This same grandmother of mine was apparently also abducted by greys, had her eggs harvested, and bore children. It was also brought to my attention that apparently these children had a failure to thrive and needed mother's milk. So imagine having to have that visual of your grandmother in your head. For those of you who want to know more details about this, I am working on a book that's detailing my case much further, as well as providing a lot more evidence to support my claims. Because I've had some breakthroughs the last couple months. But another interesting fact that I wanted to bring up for this video was location. As it turns out, my own backyard is apparently a hotbed for UFO activity and has been since Roswell, or at least since the Kenneth Arnold incident. Some of you may be going, well, Dakota, Kenneth Arnold, that was a sighting at Mount Rainier in Washington, which is a bordering state. But Kenneth Arnold was actually a prominent figure here in Idaho. It's where he started his business, to where that was allowing him to fly around the country. And in the 1960s, he actually ran for governor. He lost, but he was based out of Boise, Idaho, when he had his sighting. A few months ago, I learned of an incident known as the Twin Falls saucer hoax that apparently involved a 3-foot in diameter UFO being found in someone's backyard. FBI and military were brought in to investigate the scenery because this was right at the height of Roswell. There was also a full string of mass sightings, numerous craft being spotted, all between Kenneth Arnold and Roswell. The Twin Falls saucer hoax, it was written off as unnamed teenagers pulling a prank, which I've been trying to look for more information to try to get exact addresses and all that, because Twin Falls, it's only like a 30-minute drive from me. Something I wish I knew a hell of a lot sooner. But when this story broke that it was likely a hoax, that was when press coverage for UFOs started to die down. My own backyard helped shut down Roswell. But sightings didn't stop. They still occurred. In the recent press conference with Dr. Stephen Greer, he noted several UFOs that were mostly man-made, but several UFO sightings that took place here in Idaho. The last couple months, some more of those sightings took place. Some that I've personally had first-hand experience with. I mean, I think it was on the 1st or the 2nd of this month, I was leaving my house to go on the way to work. I was looking up at the stars to just kind of monitor the weather, because it is that time of year where it's supposed to start getting colder and snowing. Oh well, I live on major truck routes, so snow's not too much of an issue. But all of a sudden, I see this flashing light in the sky. I was like, all right. It didn't look like it was an airplane. You know how a plane would have one steady light, then it would have the lights on its wings that would blink? No, it's just a flash of light. It would come up, disappear, then took a 90-degree angle and shot off. My first thought was, why the fuck do you keep showing up when I don't have any of my good cameras on me? Every freaking time. But the nature of the beast, I suppose. But that's not been the only recent sighting. There's been a couple. There was one that involved a large black triangle. And before anybody says it, maybe it was something like the TR-3B or something in the same family. It was possibly a man-made craft, not extraterrestrial in nature. I will say that now. But for God's sakes, there's more than just the TR-3B. The TR-3B has been around since at least the 60s. There's newer craft that are in the same family. This craft was spotted coming from the south towards Hollister, Idaho, coming up the South Hills, and flew towards Sun Valley, where during its transit, 3 jets intercepted it. A couple weeks before JISIC, I was notified that a police officer noticed several lights flying around the mountains where the triangle craft seemingly came from. Like in my research, I pointed out it was likely military-based craft, but that very same, just a couple hours before I got that report, I personally saw what looked like an orange light in the sky darting away from that location. And with some of the recent events, as well as some of the speakers, particularly Tony Rodriguez, when I went to JISIC and down in Orlando, I couldn't help but wonder, why is it that all of a sudden all these UFOs came about? Some of you know about my abduction that took place when I was about 6 years old, where I ended up 30 miles away in a locked house from where I was supposed to be that night. I fell asleep at my mom's house, woke up at my grandparents' 30 miles away, and nobody knew how the hell I got in the house. What solidified that it wasn't my mother who dropped me off while I was still asleep was her calling my grandparents, screaming on the other end because she couldn't find me. Through some recall work, as well as some investigation work on my own in order to try to establish a timeline. Oh, come on, I was doing so good. I narrowed down the events of which this took place to summer of 2002. I remember the house my mom and I were living in at the time with my younger sister, who was barely a year old when this took place. In fact, the outside of the house looks the exact same as it did back then. But I just had trouble trying to remember a date. Well, through scouring through UFO reports, I came across a report taking place August of 2002 that was put into New Fork, the National UFO Reporting Center, from a couple that was from out of Washington State that was passing through the area while on a road trip for their honeymoon, who saw a craft in the sky that was distant enough they couldn't really get a good description of what it looked like, but they saw this craft flying in the area where I was taken. In fact, I want to kind of try to illustrate for you what I mean. If I were to triangulate the location, this is about where it would be. This is a very rough sketch. So, was taken here, found here. I was taken here in Jerome, Idaho. I was found here in Murtaugh. This couple were driving along this highway that was not too far from the river. They spotted the craft right about here. Maybe I'll remember to put a real map in post. But they triangulate that would have been about right here, because they would have just missed the turn off of the major highway to go to Twin Falls, which would be about here. So that puts them dead center of the area where I was abducted. I've been trying to find contact information for this couple. This was obviously, being that this took place back in 2002. Their contact info may have simply been changed. They may not even be married anymore, for all I know. But I personally do want to talk with them, and if any chance that couple happens to see this, please do reach out. This couple noted that the craft that they saw flew towards the south, towards a series of mountains that the earlier UFO reports seemed to center around as well. Being that so many craft were spotted here, I couldn't help but wonder, was there some kind of base? This is sort of the new evidence I was talking about, and it's something that requires a little bit further investigation. Because I know personally that these mountains have something going on with them. There's concentrations of quartz. There's a series of caves in the area where I do know a small population of Sasquatch happen to be located. And you want to know something else? These mountains, the main entrance to the roadway up these mountains is about 20 minutes from where I was found. I was found at my grandparents' house, so thankfully I was left somewhere with some people that I knew, and I was left in a safe location. These mountains, they're in direct view of my grandparents' backyard. In fact, growing up, if there was ever a good storm in the area, we would look towards the front of the house because you could see the Snake River Canyon. If you can see the canyon, storm wasn't that bad. We looked towards the mountains. If you can see the mountains, storm wasn't all that bad. If you couldn't see either, then yeah, you're going to have some problems. During my abduction, after I was rescued, I remember asking to be dropped off at my grandparents'. Why? Because I didn't want to go home. I didn't know that whether or not the things that took me were still going to be there. But Grandma and Grandpa's house was safe. And it just so happens that where that craft was spotted, I could see my grandma's house from there. And my grandparents were home, so it wouldn't be long for me to be taken home. It wouldn't have been hard for me to be taken home. My grandparents were fairly young. My grandfather, he passed away, but my grandparents would be in their 60s now. And I'm only 27, so they were fairly young. They were fairly young old people. When it comes to reports of Sasquatch, a lot of people speculate that these beings may serve as some sort of guardians to inner Earth. And as it turns out, there's been a speculated inner Earth entrance there this whole time. When I first spotted the Sasquatch in those mountains, I was on an 8th grade ski trip. I know it's kind of bouncing around, but again, this entire situation is an ongoing saga, and as I'm digging back more into my past and have more things to transpire, I'm realizing every single bit of it is fucking connected. But anyway, while on this ski trip, we were on our way back home. I was watching the scenery pass me by, and there was this cave in the side of the mountain where I saw what looked like a big ape-like thing stretch his arm out, rested it towards the top of the mouth of the cave, and just watch the buzzes. I could tell it was completely covered in fur, and the face of it resembled Australopithecus. I'm shocked I was able to say that without stuttering. A few years later, while on a family camping trip, I took the opportunity to do a little bit of a Bigfoot hunting, and I prepped an area to try to spot the creature with my own eyes. Well, with a $50 toy set of night vision goggles I had at the time. They were like those little spy gear toys that you can get, and it was genuine night vision. They worked rather well, but the display screen on the inside was about the same size as an old flip phone. So I was a kid. I didn't really have an income source at the time, or parents that were willing to spoil me and buy me whatever I wanted. But I digress. I prepped an area by setting bait out, which was actually a chocolate bar, in order to try to lure out a Sasquatch. As I was setting the bait trap, not trap in a traditional sense, just basically, I planted the bait somewhere where I thought would force the creature to come out of hiding if they really wanted that candy bar. As I was setting things up, I noticed that there's what looks like a little kid behind me trying to sneak up on me. I glanced over my shoulder and I realized that little kid looked an awful lot like a furry monkey. Then I realized, oh, that's a baby Bigfoot. I jumped and I ended up spooking the thing, and whether it managed to disappear through an alternate dimension or just managed to run off, it was dark at night and its fur was almost completely black. From the looks of it, it was very dark. There was no way I was going to be able to catch up with it. Though now that I think about it, I've always been kind of skeptical of the interdimensional claims behind Bigfoot. Undiscovered ape in the forest? Yeah, maybe. You never know. But its elusiveness, being that it's interdimensional, that was something I was skeptical of. And an episode about the Bonkers that I would really encourage people to watch was one where we interviewed Dr. Jeffrey Meldrum, who was a Idaho State University professor that openly he talks about primates and he openly discusses and advocates for the research of Bigfoot. Awesome guy. We had him on the show. I told him about my experience, and I showed him a photograph that I took of the casting, which, just based on the photo alone, he believed was a legitimate finding. Score! Anyway. During that episode, he pointed out an experiment where a group of hunters was told to look for a pack of deer that were in a certain square area. The deer were marked with GPS, the hunters were marked with GPS. And they would have these several different groups go in looking for the deer. Well, none of the hunters claimed they saw the deer. Yet, say that these squiggly lines were, say these depicted some mountains, and this little big squiggle is bushes. The hunters were over here, right? The deer were right here, almost within 10 yards of each other, and they didn't see the deer. Humans aren't as good as wildlife trackers as they like to believe. The animals are going to know it. So if a simple deer can dodge hunters, you imagine what would be essentially a very tall gorilla with human-like intelligence could be able to do. But as I was saying, now that I think about it, the camp spot we were at when I had spotted the baby Bigfoot, there was not really a clearing for it to, in the direction it took off in, there was not really a clearing. It was nothing but bushes and trees. There was a point, rather quickly, again, it was dark, I wouldn't have been able to get a good look at this thing. There was a point where the bushes stopped rustling a little too quickly. Could it just be a situation where it realized I wasn't running for it, so it decided to just squat down and wait it out till I got bored? Maybe. But who knows? Where does this leave my case? Well, it's still wide open. As for why I got chosen to have some sort of hybrid children, I was a man on the inside. The Envoy program, one of the main focuses of them, I believe it was called the Zagorov program, as Elena Denon calls it. Its main purpose was to utilize the Starseed/Envoy program as a loophole in order to send Galactic Federation volunteers and officers down to Earth to where they could operate and slowly help free the human population. That program's been shut down because it's been deemed no longer needed. They're still going to be Starseeds, but their missions are going to be completely different. When it comes to Lyran, Pleiadian, Tall, and Heel societies, they openly advocate for interplanetary relationships. They're all for it. Maybe it's for diplomatic reasons. They feel that if the worlds are engaging enough, if cultures on different worlds are engaging enough to where they have kids with one another, then that symbolizes unity of the species, of the galaxy. It's common practice for the human species, that is Lyra, the Pleiadians, many from Sirius B, and all of its other descendants, it's common practice to hybridize the children of planets they intend to colonize with indigenous beings, so that way the offspring are able to survive easier. By that logic, me having an intergalactic baby mama and them having conducted operations here on Earth leaves that potential open, that they are coming. They're going to be part of the welcoming committee when the grand reveal takes place. And I just happened to be the lucky SOB on the ground. And they knew that once enough of me had awakened to it, they would still be related to me even if this body were to die and I were to go back to my other one that's in the stasis pod. It's my understanding that my Pleiadian self DNA has been integrated into this body so I could carry out this mission. So in short, why is Dakota such a weird case? Well, it's just because I was just the right mix of everything that transpired. There's some people that have tried to flag me down when I mentioned that my ancestry connects back to Ea. And it's true. There's been DNA tests done to validate this. That known descendants of Ea's bloodline, the royal bloodlines, are my direct ancestors. So I've been screwed since the beginning of the human race. And that also connects me, because of that bloodline connection, that connects me to Yeshua, that connects me to Adam and Eve, it connects me to Enlil, in a way. And there's a possibility that even he's stepped into my story too, but that's something that I need to check into first before I make any official claims. I'm not gonna lie, I've gotten excited and gotten things mixed up before, especially when trying to figure out who my kid's mother is. That's twisted up more potential relationships than I can count. But I know that these circumstances apply to others. There's others who have this right mix of fucked up family backgrounds and weird bloodlines to where their life is a walking science fiction show. But as a lot of us are coming to realize, science fiction is soon to become fact. And while we do have pretty good confirmation that the world is going to be chaotic, regardless of what the case may be, we need to embrace every single day, no matter how malevolent, dark, or depressing things may get. Truly amazing things are coming about. That's honestly something that I've learned trying to deal with all this. And I hope, and honestly, to be truthful with you guys, I've always said that I'm not really a big fan of trusting your inner gut feeling because I know I've mixed myself up a number of cases. You know, the whole explanation of if something resonates with you, it must be true. Because humans have a tendency to get things mixed up. And there's still a lot of people that seem to only go into this type of thing wanting to confirm their own delusions. And I seriously fear that certain aspects of this story, having a loving family that's from the stars, that's been willing to jump through loopholes just to make sure I was okay throughout everything that's transpired. There's been days where that's been the only guiding light keeping me going. And if I were to find out that it was all BS, I don't know what I would do. But I also have confirmation from the fact that it's not just me that's seen these things. There's people who have photographed the craft I was sitting in, flying around in. The more I go into this, the more I've talked about it, the more the world just seems to be going insane. It looks like I have one hell of a family reunion on the horizon. It's certainly going to make things interesting, to say the least. I hope that answered some questions about why my case seems to be so weird. There's a lot of you that have been very supportive with how I've come out about these stories, and I really do appreciate it. Part of what's been so hard about trying to come forward, and if you've seen me blow up, I do apologize. That was not the right thing to do, but this stuff's personal. It affects me deeply. It's a bit of a sensitive topic, for lack of a better word. And when I've come forward before and had people attack me, try to say I was faking, blah 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 blah, that shit hurt. It hurt. I don't know, I don't know why I let myself get hurt, but it did. It was not cool of me to fire off, and I know there's been some people that have thought I was blaming them because it was on their platforms I talked about these types of things, but I don't. Had those people not come forward, I wouldn't have slowly built the strength to start doing this and put together my new book. So for those of you who may be wondering when that's going to come out, I'm aiming for summer 2024 at the latest. I got the first few chapters done and looking good, but I'm going to be revealing stuff in this book that I've never revealed before. And I know that in a lot of ways it's going to paint me in a bad light. That's not me being paranoid about how trolls might interpret my case, but I'm going to confess some things. Some things I'm not proud of, but I've done my best to make amends for. I'm going to share some true thoughts about how I felt about certain people that have already taken offense with how I've portrayed them in the past. But in the same light, it's going to be a reflection of what I learned through all this. It's going to be, well, let's just say the best way I know how to put this book together was to write out the journey of how I've come to understand everything and what happened to lead me to those points. There's going to be some confessions. There's going to be some heartache. Maybe there's going to be some couple sexy affairs. I don't know. But it's going to probably be the most real that I've ever been about myself. Something I've needed to do for a long time. And at the end of the day, I can only hope that it helps someone. I hope that you enjoy it. I hope you enjoy these videos. I've hoped that if there's people out there who look for help, that something about me coming forward has helped you. Because if that's the case, then mission complete. So far, there haven't been any visits back to my home world yet. For those of you who may be wondering about the information I shared from the first video in this series, but I'll let you know when that happens. And I'll let you know if the security camera I have up actually catches anything. I might actually put in a second one to try to cover a blind spot, but one step at a time, right? Much love, stay safe, and that it's that time of year. Happy holidays.